Hello and welcome to today's webinar about personal experiences with autism and Asperger syndrome. Beyond the Wall featuring Professor Stephen Shore. I'm Sakhi Singhi, Project Coordinator at the India Autism Center, a first of its kind integrative community project. We'll begin this webinar in a moment, but first let me let you know that we'll be fielding questions throughout this webinar, and you're free. Professor Shore will answer your questions in the last 15 minutes of his talk, but you're free to shoot questions throughout his lecture. Before I call Professor Shore, I'd like to introduce Professor Stephen Mark Shore. He's an autistic professor of special education at Adelphi University. He's written the books that include College for Students with Disabilities, Understanding Autism for Dummies, Ask and Tell, and Beyond the Wall. Currently, he serves on the board of Autism Speaks, and he's one of the first two autistic board members in its history, looking to improve the potentials of those on the autism spectrum. He once headed the Asperger's Association of New England and was on the board of the Autism Society of America. I'd like to welcome Professor Shore.
All right, it's great to be in front of so many people who are dedicated to helping autistic people to lead fulfilling and productive lives, and to make that the rule rather than the exception. So let us begin. I'll share my screen, and let's talk about how we can help both the autistic individuals you support and also yourselves as we go through some very challenging times. So we're going to take a look from the inside on how we can support individuals on the autism spectrum during this COVID-19 pandemic. And also we can generalize this information to other situations, other challenging situations that may occur. So let us, let me just get this going. And here we are. So one important thing to keep in mind is what I call the big three as we celebrate Autism Awareness Day. And I also like to think of this day as the 4 A's of autism: awareness of autism, acceptance of individuals on the autism spectrum for who we are and working with our characteristics, and also appreciating what autistic individuals can bring to society. And finally, all of this gets glued together by action. So thinking of these 4 A's of autism, it's important to maintain routines. Maintain routines for parents, caregivers, and others supporting autistic individuals. And doing that as closely as possible. However, there are going to be situations where these routines cannot be kept. And then the question is, number 2, how do we communicate these routines? How do we communicate these routines to the person on the autism spectrum in the best way possible. So I hope you'll excuse the screen flipping back and forth. It's not working quite in the way that I expected it to, but we'll get through anyways. And then finally, the self-care. What are things that we can do to help individuals on the autism spectrum and to help yourselves? Because you need to be in tip-top shape in order to provide support to others. So just like in airplanes during the safety announcement, not that anybody's flying on airplanes these days, but if you remember, they always talk about your needing to put your oxygen mask on first before you help somebody else, because if you don't do that, you won't be in any shape to help anybody else. So let's let the fun continue. A little bit about me. Things were pretty typical at first. At 24 hours of age, my wife says I looked like an egg. And then at 18 months, like what happens to about 30% of us, what I call the regressive autism bomb exploded. And this is where I lost functional communication, I had meltdowns, withdrew from the environment, and in brief, I became a pretty severely affected autistic little child. There was so little known about autism in those days, so little known, that it took my parents a whole year to find a place for diagnosis. The questions, where does autism come from? What can we do to work with autism? Back then, and including today, we still have these questions. We know a lot more about what we can do to support autistic individuals to lead fulfilling and productive lives. And now we can use these strategies that we've used for decades to support autistic individuals now during this critical time where everybody's lives have been turned upside down and inside out by this pandemic. So what happened to me, my parents finally found a place for diagnosis at age 2.5. And the doctors said they had never seen such a sick child, and they recommended institutionalization. Well, fortunately for me, like we see so many parents today, they advocated on my behalf, and they convinced the school to take me in about a year. And it was during that year that my parents implemented what we would today refer to as an intensive home-based early intervention program. And this was a program in today's terms that we'd say included a lot of movement, sensory integration, music, narration, and imitation. And with the work that my parents did, speech began to return at age 4. So what did they do? First, they tried to get me to imitate them. That didn't work. Something perhaps about difference in mirror neurons that makes it hard for autistic people, especially in the very early days, to imitate others. So then my parents flipped it around and imitated me. And once they did that, I became aware of them in my environment. And then they were able to move me along. And I believe the key implication is that as a prerequisite for successful interaction, education, and supporting of autistic individuals, you have to meet that person where they are, come into their world, and then bring them with you. And I think that holds true for everybody else. You have to develop that trusting relationship first before you can move on. So I believe that we have the technology, we have the wherewithal, we have the knowledge so that we can turn away from what I call a deficit-based model of autism towards an abilities-based model and open the door to promoting success, fulfillment, productive lives, and a feeling of safety during these unusual times. And rather than autism being a bomb, autism, you might say, becomes da bomb. And that is what happens when individuals on the autism spectrum are able to use their abilities and strengths to contribute to society. So here I am at age 4. As I mentioned, speech was beginning to come back. I entered the school that initially rejected me. I got reevaluated. Instead of being considered as psychotic and ready for an institution, I now got upgraded to neurotic. I also discovered the wonderful world of watch motors. I was found at age 4 taking apart a watch with a sharp knife. I would pop open the back, take out the motor, disassemble that, play with the little gears, spin them around, and put it all back together again. The watch still worked, and there weren't any pieces left over. So my parents, upon noticing this, they turned away from the closed doors of disability, disorder, and deficit and looked at the open doors of ability, and soon provided all kinds of other devices to take apart and then put it back together again. And I always found that my parents, whatever I was interested in, and I got interested in many, many things, it always seemed like they were interested in it too. And I think what that underscores is the importance of parental support, the importance of what parents bring to the equation for supporting autistic individuals. Parents spend more time with us autistic kids than anybody else. And in that way, parents are the experts on their kids and a vital part of our collaboration in supporting autistic individuals in education, in life, and certainly now during these difficult times of the COVID-19 pandemic. My parents made a big deal about this, building a strong sense of self-awareness. And that's critical because that is a key requisite for building a sense of self-determination, and which, in other words, being able to make good adult decisions, knowing where your strengths and where your challenges are. Perhaps in the future, I could have become a watchmaker, a watch repairman. I would have needed a lot of support in terms of communication and living as an adult, or at least that's what it looked like at that time. And this also teaches us that we're pretty poor at prognosis. I've seen so many situations where somebody has been considered too autistic, too severe, too something or other, and not being able to lead a fulfilling and productive life. But as time goes on, things develop, and that person ends up being very successful. And always the success hinges upon finding a way to use that person's interests, strengths, and abilities. So moving on to kindergarten, at age 6, regular school, I was a social and academic catastrophe. And you know what happens to people who are different in grade school? There was a lot of bullying. Teachers, I was usually about a grade behind in most of my subjects. Teachers didn't quite know how to reach me. I spent most of my elementary school days going into the library, getting all the books on my favorite subjects, reading them over and over, taking notes, copying diagrams, and sometimes even wondering, is there more to school than reading my favorite books, which I was happy to do? Shouldn't I be reading in groups or maybe doing math or something? And I think what it translated to is that teachers didn't quite know how to reach me. But since I wasn't a behavior problem, they just kind of left me to my own devices. And in those days, it was probably for better rather than for worse. I suppose repeating the letter B over and over again didn't endear me to my classmates. Fortunately, these days, we have all kinds of strategies, visuals, schedules, 5-point scales, other social narratives such as social stories and power cards and cartooning, so that we can communicate in the best way possible to that child on the autism spectrum as to what expectations are and also how to best interact with our environment. So let's take a case here. We've got Bindu, the ball thrower. And in this situation, schools are closed for a month. So let's take a look. If there's a ball anywhere in the room, Bindu, an elementary school non-speaking child on the autism spectrum, will find and throw it. Attempts to remove the ball or keeping it away from her result in a catastrophic meltdown lasting at least a half an hour. Curiously, this behavior only happens with balls. Although Bindu's educational plan dictates balls be kept out of sight, her teachers aren't always successful in doing so. As a result of her behavior around balls, she's considered as one of the school's most difficult students. So you may know individuals on the spectrum like that. It may not be with balls, it might be with something else. And that it seems like that's all they want to do. So what the school did is they called in a behavioral consultant. And the consultant identified the ball as a powerful reinforcer. And they set up a program where if Bindu did this, then she could get that. So one of those standard if-thens. So they get through the first cycle. Bindu would do her work. Okay, now you get to play with the ball. She gets the ball, throws it, runs to get it, throws it again. Break time is all done. Time to go back to work. And they'd never be able to get back to work. So what can we do in such a situation? So we are aware, that's the first day, Autism Awareness Month. We are aware that Bindu is autistic. We're also aware that she really likes this particular object. And is there a way that we can work with, that we can accept this interest? Let's work with this interest and find a way to teach her what she needs to be taught. So suggest a plan enabling Bindu to be in the same room as a ball without engaging in this type of behavior. And what might you do as her teacher or parent to implement this plan? So what I would do is I'd borrow from the techniques of the Miller method. The Miller method is a developmental cognitive approach for teaching and supporting autistic individuals. And the idea behind the Miller method is that practitioners do the best they can to understand what it's like for that autistic person. And so what I would do is I'd come in with a big box or a sack of balls, dozens of them, maybe even hundreds of them, different sizes, shapes, colors, weights, different materials. And I'd go right over to Bindu. Well, she'd probably come running over to me, seeing this embarrassment of riches. And I'd give her a ball. I'd say, here. She takes it and she throws it. And I do it again. Here. She throws it. And I do that for a period of time, and I develop what's referred to as a system. So a unit of behavior around a person, object, or event. And I'm building a relationship with her. And upon doing so, I can start to shape the behavior. Perhaps I will present the ball close to my face. Well, then she has to orient towards me, look in my direction. If she can't make eye contact, well, I'm not going to be worried about forcing eye contact, but as long as she's orienting towards me, I'd be very happy with that. Maybe I'd offer to her and let her hand kind of chase around. Ooh, there's some really interesting effects here. Her hand chase my hand a little bit before giving her the ball to throw it. And what I'm doing is I'm building this trusting relationship, which is a key requisite for developing a bond and being able to teach her something. And then when she begins to understand that I am here to provide something of great interest or reinforcement, if you want to talk in behavioral terms, then she's much more willing to work with me. And then I can use these objects to teach counting, to teach perhaps opening an object and pulling one out, categorizing by color, size, and whatnot. Maybe shaping the behavior so that Bindu throws this ball into a basket, the precursors of basketball, whatever it may be. And in that way, I'm working with this fascination and actually appreciating this fascination, that third A, because it allows me in to teach her what needs to be taught. So that's all well and good. And now it has just been announced that due to COVID-19, the schools are closed for a month. And getting back to those big threes, how are you going to maintain Bindu's school schedule as close to possible, as closely as possible at home? How are you going to communicate the changes in a way that Bindu understands? And finally, what care are you going to give to yourself that you can best now support Bindu, where in addition to being a parent, you are now Bindu's teacher as well. And that's what's happening all around the world as schools close, as clinics close, and everybody is stuck at home. So 90% of the people in the United States are at home, just like I am at home. And it's a major disruption to our schedules, autistic or otherwise. And we need strategies in order to remain successful, and in some cases, remain sane. So to maintain Bindu's school schedule as closely as possible, find out from her teacher. I mean, ideally, you would have been communicating with her teacher to get an idea of what her schedule is anyways, but if not, let's communicate with the teacher and find out what the school routine is. Is there a way to approximate opening circle? Everybody's home now. People are home from work. Let's all get together at 8:30 or 9 o'clock or whenever that opening circle is and see who's at home and see what people are doing, just like we do in school. If the teacher sings during that, say taking attendance, like I often do in a situation, I might say, "Where is Bindu? Where is Bindu? Here she is." And Bindu would raise her hand and we'd all recognize her. And maybe there'd be a picture of Bindu that in school I might have removed from a poster of a home and move that picture and stick it on the poster of school. But in this case, that could be adapted. And maybe we take a picture of Bindu's bedroom, and now it's from her bedroom to the kitchen, living room, whatever room you happen to be in order to do this opening circle. What else happens during school? Various subjects are taught. Is usually a snack time in the mid-morning. Well, let's have that too. And likewise for lunch and maybe afternoon snack. And then recognizing the close of the school day with similar routines. How do we communicate? Well, we already have all those tools. We don't have to invent anything new. So it might be a picture schedule. Maybe it's a social story. Maybe it's cartooning, however that person best communicates. That person may speak very well and communicates just like the rest of us, and all we have to do is talk about it. Maybe we have to set up a picture word schedule and put it on the wall, the best way she understands. And then finally, how are you going to care for yourself so that you can best support yourself, other family members, and certainly Bindu? So again, it's the big three: maintaining routines, clear communication in the best way that person communicates, and self-care. Taking a break. We often need to do that. Sometimes we just need to hit the pause button. And in doing this exercise, this is something that you can even do it right now. You can practice. You can just hit the pause, stop the myriad thoughts that are running around in your head. You exhale slowly and deliberately. Do that 3 times. Inhale the calm. Think of a nice, calm situation. Go to your happy place, you might say. Uh, I see Ruma, it looks like her eyes are closed there, and maybe she's doing that right now, or at least thinking about doing that right now. And likewise, it's great to see many parents and others that I've met a lot over the years, and I look forward to meeting again once we can start traveling and presenting face to face. I saw Mary Barrera was on here, and again, many others. Great people who are supporting autistic individuals, both individually, their child, and then taking that out to the community and becoming great supports to the community. So you do that a few times. You inhale calm, you exhale stress, and then how do you feel? And you'll probably feel much more relaxed. So that's just one example of self-care. India being the birthplace of yoga and related type of self-care, this is a great place to be talking about this stuff. Social story. What is the coronavirus? This is the first thing that I saw that popped up once the virus really began to take hold and affect people around the world. The autism educator, take a screenshot so that you can grab this link and you can go and see a great social story that this autism educator in Ireland developed. And what I've seen is that there's been great contributions from around the world. So just there are scientists around the world collaborating between different countries to figure out a vaccine for this, to address this COVID-19 pandemic. Likewise, people from around the world are contributing to helping, supporting autistic individuals. So again, capture a screenshot so that you have the link and you can find the whole social story there. And likewise for education, many companies, again, around the world are providing resources that they initially charged for. I see Ruma there, she just took a screenshot, it looks like, that's great. Around the world, education companies are offering their resources free for a period of time, perhaps as long as this epidemic is going on. And again, click on, you go to that link, and it's a huge spreadsheet. It seems like there's hundreds of companies there. And in that way, you can continue and maintain the person you're supporting, their education, and just generally good ideas. Finally, I'll be happy to make this presentation available to everybody. Maybe I'll send it to the India Autism Center, and it can be downloaded as a PDF. And in that way, the links will already be there, and you'll be able to access them easily. So look at what has been going on in Qatar. I just found this early this morning through people I know. Thank you very much for that one. It might have been from Hasna, who runs the CDC, Child Development Center in Qatar, a great school for supporting autistic individuals. And this is a great infographic, which could also double as a sort of social story, describing what coronavirus is. And since many of us autistic people, I would say most of us tend to be visually oriented. Keyword is most, and not all, but most of us autistic people are visually oriented. Something like this can be very helpful, even this particular one. So thank you to the state of Qatar for this one. So here I am at age 8. I'd spend hours cracking open small rocks with a big rock. I was fascinated by the shiny specks inside, the sharp edges. That eventually grew into a special interest in geology, geography, and so on. I remember about this time I had a stack of astronomy books on my desk. and a teacher told me that I'd never learn how to do math. Well, somehow I figured out just enough math to teach statistics at the university level. Again, prognosis, lack, or just an example of how bad we are at prognosis. These days, we know much more about accepting and appreciating autistic characteristics. Yeah, and I see Rob Bernstein is here too. Oh, great to see you. I remember we were out in India and at a conference, the India Autism Center a couple of years ago. It was great meeting you at that time. Oh, there's your face. All right, great to see you there. And you're doing a lot of good work to support autistic people as well. So anyways, now that we know more about autism and thinking about autism in a more developmental way, I see greater numbers of autistic, or I should say of teachers, recognizing these interests. And these days, a teacher probably would have found a way to teach math through astronomy in this case. And in that way, make the subject intrinsically reinforcing. Interests and strengths. We all learn better and faster about things we're interested in. For autistic individuals, it's just to a much greater degree. And one thing that's important to understand about people on the spectrum is that we're a study of extremes. And what that translates to is that the things we're good at, we tend to be incredibly good at. The things that we're not so good at, well, that can be a real challenge. And as I'm talking about using a strengths-based or abilities approach for supporting autistic individuals, we do have to be cognizant of those challenges. And I think you all will agree with me that autism does bring significant challenges. If autism didn't bring significant challenges, we wouldn't all be here trying to figure it out. So we do have to support the challenges and also find ways to access those strengths. I started getting interested in bicycles, found them fascinating, maybe because of all the spinning parts. And I would spend hours riding my bicycle. And I got it to a point where I could take a bicycle apart down to the ball bearings and maybe get that back together again as well. So maybe at this time it looked like maybe I could be a bicycle mechanic. Verbal interaction was pretty good at that point, but still support might have been needed. You know, it looked like support would have been needed for perhaps continuing education after grade school, maybe independent living. And again, it's important to always be thinking about what are we learning now, or what do we know now that can be used later to support areas of interest in terms of study, in terms of possible employment. All right, continuing on. Again, those special interests. So often we think of interests, those special interests, as something that we have to get rid of. We have to put that away. Let's get rid of it so the person could then do something else. But if instead, if we think of a special interest of one of such great intensity that provides powerful motivation for learning mathematics, for learning other curriculum, for exploring career options, then we can use the great motivating power behind those particular interests. These are some of my special interests. They come and they go. Sometimes there's more than one of them at a time. And again, I find them fascinating, and so do many others on the spectrum. And the question is, how can we use these focused interests to promote fulfilling and productive lives? At age 10, I was so concerned about the letter E, because in English, there is a rule that you have to drop E before adding ing to a word. And I thought this E was going to get hurt when it fell to the ground. I was so worried about this E. I also had a friend who said he felt like a pizza. He didn't look like one. He didn't smell like one. So had no idea what he was talking about. I also remember about this time our session being interrupted by an announcement. The principal had lost his mother. Oh, so what does that mean? Well, it made me think of what my parents tell me when I lost something. Well, it's the last place you left it, they would say. I thought that was a really silly answer because if I knew that, then I wouldn't be asking them. But anyways, I thought if that was good enough for them to tell me probably thousands of times, that would be a good suggestion for the principal. Well, all I can say is that didn't go well at all. So if it looks like we're being rude, if we're being not respecting authority, talking back, being insulting, it might be that we're just interpreting the environment literally. And that's something that we do. That's a characteristic. We tend to interpret communication literally. And that's because we have difficulty perceiving the nonverbal cues that indicate that someone's telling a joke, engaging in sarcasm, or using an idiom. And so if we understand that, this is something that we can work with. Research suggests that up to 93% of interaction is nonverbal. And so that means we may be only getting 7% of the meaning. Literal thought. Middle and high school. Well, you don't need to be autistic to have difficulties in middle and high school. Middle and high school is a tough time for so many people. But for me, it was actually easier, and for at least a couple of reasons. One good reason was that I figured out finally that using words instead of sound effects from the environment really helped with social interaction. I also was able to engage in a focused interest. In this case, it was music. A focused interest of music. I joined the band. Now I had a structured activity in which to mediate my interactions with others. I got so geeked out on music that I got it into my autistic head that I needed to learn how to play all the instruments, every last one of them. So I would spend hours in the instrument closet, figuring out how the other instruments worked. I'd take them apart. Sometimes I'd recombine them in ways that they should never have been recombined and seen the light of day. And while I didn't learn all the instruments, I did get it up to about 15. And then when I learned that one of the requisites for a degree in music education was that you had to learn how to play all the instruments, well, what couldn't be better? And that's exactly what I did. It was off to college to study music education and to learn more instruments. So here I was in middle school, all psyched up about playing at a concert. Interests. This is also one of the reasons that I give music lessons to autistic children and adults too. And in doing so, I believe that music provides a real life key in which to develop interactions with others. And this is in addition to all the therapeutic benefits that you get by engaging in music. Also, music is just plain old fun. And then finally, I haven't figured out how to teach typical kids yet, so I just stick with the ones on the autism spectrum. They make a lot more sense to me. However, music is a very sensory activity, and I remember skipping a lot of jazz band rehearsals because as a trombone player, the trumpets behind me were just too loud. They were just too loud. And I complained to the band teacher. And the band teacher didn't understand. Not many people understood what sensory issues were in those days. Maybe nobody did. And he'd tell me something like, don't be ridiculous. So I'd skip a whole bunch of rehearsals. he couldn't get me to come back. So why is this occurring? Why is this challenging behavior occurring? So if we want to know why behavior is occurring, we have to do a good functional behavior assessment. Why is this occurring? Was it because I didn't like the band director? Well, that has one solution. And I think I see Veronica here too, from all the way from Peru, from Lima, Peru. So great to see you here too. And thanks for all the support you're giving to autistic people and to your son as well. So anyways, back to why is this happening? Maybe I don't like jazz music. Well, that has another solution. Maybe I don't like my classmates. Maybe I don't like the instrument because it's dirty and it smells, but it was none of the above. Well, one day, like any good autistic person, I marched into the band director's office with a set of alternate seating charts to get the trombones away from being in front of the trumpets, and demanded that the band director make a change. Well, he didn't do it, it didn't work, but at least now I know more about effective ways for self-advocacy. So, addressing challenging behavior. We've got Arvind here, he's an artist. Now, Arvind is a middle school student with limited speaking ability. He spends hours drawing shapes using crayons on big pieces of paper. Even as a toddler, attempts to remove these drawing material in hopes of getting him to engage with the class and others. Arvind would scream, bite, kick, bite the back of his hand, and just have a big old meltdown. Unable to achieve success in getting Arvind to join his classmates, his teachers now permit him to while away the day with his crayons and paper. So they say, well, we're including Arvind, he's sitting at the back of the room, he's doing his thing, and we're teaching everybody else whatever they're learning. So what I call that is geographical inclusion. That's not really inclusion. It's two people being in the same space. In order for true inclusion to occur, both, in this case, Arvind and the students would have to benefit from being with each other. So what can we do to employ Arvind's desire to draw as a path towards greater social interaction? What might I do as his teacher or parent to implement this plan? And so this is what I did. I got called into a consult in Los Angeles for a student just like this. And he didn't say very much, but there he was at the table. He was drawing all these wonderful shapes, abstract type of art. And I'm not an artist, but it did seem like he was drawing some beautiful things there. So thinking about how do I work with as opposed to against his characteristics? How do I become the person who is here to supply him with what he wants, with what's reinforcing, as opposed to taking it away and then making him earn it? So I sat down at the other kitty corner end of the table, and it was a big piece of paper, and I started drawing on my side of the paper. And I wondered, gee, how close can I get to his drawing before he gets upset or maybe has a meltdown or indicates that he doesn't want this to happen at all? So I'm drawing closer and closer, and I find that I can draw and make my drawings right up against his drawings. And in fact, he even had gaps in his drawings, and I could color them in with any color that I wanted. He seemed okay with that. He looked at me and then went back to his business. I wondered how much he could communicate. So I picked up a crayon and I asked, what color is this? And he told me it was green. I did that with a number of other colors. He told me the color correctly every time. I could ask him to pick up a certain color and then give it to me. Or I could offer him a color and he'd take it and start drawing with that color. And what that told me is that drawing was not this horrible obsession that we need to get rid of, but it's a key in which to develop interaction with him, both at home and at school. And now schools are closed for a month. So the question is, how will you maintain Arvine's school schedule as closely as possible at home? So in this case, I'd work on maintaining the schedule, and I'd also work on continuing to develop more interactions with him. If drawing is so important to him, can we teach math by counting crayons? Can we, well, he already knows his colors, but we can work on categorization of colors, of sizes of crayons, bringing crayons to other people who he trusts, picking up crayons from others. And in that way, we use what he's interested in order to be successfully interact in this case. So there's the big three again. Maintaining routines, clear communication, and the best way Arvind communicates, and in this case, he does seem to have some amount of verbal or spoken interaction. So let's use that, and we'll supplement that with pictures and maintain the routine of the school day as closely as possible. So here's another simple break that we can take, that you can take when you need it. Just take a few seconds to do so, and you make good use of your hands, and you breathe in and you clench your fists, and you breathe out, long, slow breath, you release them, and you do that a few times, and you can even extend that by adding in another set of 3. You breathe in and breathe out. And in that way, that's a quick way to relax and to take care of yourselves. And whatever else you can do to take care of yourselves as well. Sometimes you just need to go out for a walk. Of course, maintaining, at least at this time, proper social distancing. So here's some more resources for support. Reaching out to the autistic community as well. And here we have Jean Holverstadt, who developed a survival kit, 19 tips, probably because of from COVID-19. That's where she got the idea of 19. And she's contributing 19 tips in order to maintain mental and physical health. So at this point, we've been talking about mental health, but also physical health. So those of us who are stuck at home under essentially a mass quarantine, what can we do? Well, what it means is that you have to make your movements intentional. So during a typical workday, at least for me anyways, I would ride my bicycle or walk or sometimes drive the mile from where I lived to my school campus, go into my office and start work, usually at about 8 o'clock in the morning. And then during the day, I'd get up out of my office. I would have questions to ask colleagues. Maybe I would just visit them. Maybe we'd arrange to go to lunch, maybe somewhere else on campus or maybe off campus, and so on. And so what I'm bringing about here is that there was a good amount of walking that occurred during the day, and certainly to and from classes as well. And without even intending to, it would be pretty easy maybe to get about 5,000 steps in. Always good to get 10,000, but at least get half of that without really thinking about it. Well, these days, at least I find that I'm spending a lot more time sitting in front of a computer, doing more sitting than maybe I've ever done in my life, because all work now is being done online. We're teaching all of our courses online. Maybe that's happening with you as well. All of your work has been ported to online, which means you have to be much more intentional in regards to your movement. And for me, what that means is making sure that every second day I get on an elliptical bike that I happen to have at home, and I spin that thing for an hour. And then on the days that I'm not spinning the elliptical bike, doing various other types of exercises, sit-ups, push-ups, back extensions, and other things that you can do at home And you don't really need any equipment to do it. And certainly yoga falls under this as well. That's definitely something you can do at home. If you already have a routine, make sure you keep doing that routine. If you don't, there's plenty of information on that on YouTube and on the internet, and even doing some simple stuff and being very intentional and making sure that you move enough during the day. And that's something that I've always had questions about in education as well. Why do we expect students to sit in their chairs essentially all day? And us educators, we so often don't notice that because as a teacher, in my case, as a professor, I can sit at my desk and talk, which I rarely do. I can stand and talk, which I often do. I can walk and pace around the room, which I often do as well. And in that way, I have many more options for movement than the students do. The students are expected to sit in their chair. What if I was teaching my class and my 25 students all started getting up and milling around the room during class? I think that might be an interesting experiment to try. But for the most part, that's not done. And all through education, whether it's preschool, well, preschool, there seems to be more movement. Maybe grade school, all through grade school, there is that expectation that you just sit down and you do your work, or you listen to the teacher, rather passively at that. Structure. We all need structure to be successful, autistic or otherwise, autistic more so. So here's another resource from Next for Autism. And there's some great ideas for structuring your day, especially now that you're probably working at home. What are some things that you can structure your day in order to be successful? Things that you take for granted that just happen in the workplace, but now you have to implement at home. And so while this was written for autistic people, the tips in here and the suggestions are very helpful for everybody else as well. So this falls under supporting the person on the autism spectrum and also self-care and managing your day. Oh, here's Farhan. He provides transportation system information to lost patrons at Penn Station, a busy, busy station. As we think about the characteristics, Farhan might have been diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome or autism level 1 in these days, now that we don't have Asperger's syndrome anymore. And as we look at the characteristics, again, so often defined as deficits. Autism is so often defined as deficits in social communication, restricted interest, repetitive motions, sensory issues, and so on. What if we changed that deficit word, that D word, to difference, and look at it as a difference in communication, social interaction, restricted interests, and so on. So looking at these characteristics, instead of working against them and trying to make the autistic person something that they're not, let's just work with them. The communication characteristics of someone who's at autism level 1, who speaks well, maybe speaks better than we do. Well, we tend to be detailed, factual, data-driven, truthful, repetitive. I think you get the idea. Well, the question is, how many times have you asked someone to repeat directions when you're lost? And so as he's helping lost patrons find their way, they often say, could you repeat the directions? He's happy to do so. And what about social interaction? Typical social interaction can be challenging for many of us. But with a job like this, there's a good amount of social interaction. Person comes, they say hello, brief greeting, request for directions, he's happy to deliver, and then finally the person says goodbye. So that's working out pretty well. And where does he get this information? His coworkers have to look it up in a reference. But for him, all this information is memorized. This is one of his, well, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual calls it a restricted interest. I prefer to call it a passion, a focused interest. a deep interest. And since he's memorized this information, he can access it much faster than his coworkers. And because this individual is autistic, he outperforms his typical coworkers. And this gets right back to the concept of one of the characteristics of autism being an extremely widely varying skill set. The things we're good at, we're incredibly good at. The things we're not so good at, we need a lot of challenges. And that brings to mind a colleague of mine. I've known her probably for about 20 years, maybe a little bit more. She was also autistic. It took me 3 years to convince her that she could do a doctorate degree. Well, finally she did. She applied to a bunch of universities, as well as Delphi University. Finally, she decided to come to my university at Delphi and get a doctorate in social work. So she has amazing abilities in reading, processing data, presentations, basically being a good academic. However, mathematics is really challenging for her. Challenging to such a point where she's learned long ago not to even think about having a checkbook. It just doesn't work. She's a very visual type of person. She needs to see it. And the way that plays out in terms of her doing her work is that if you think back to when you're writing papers, maybe some of you are still in school and you are writing academic papers, most people will have a number of resources either on their desk and they leaf through them as they need them, or maybe they're in the computer and you just go from one window to the next and you read as needed. So the way this works for her is she has to take every single resource and lay it out on the kitchen table and the couch and the floor, and every single surface in her entire apartment is just lined with these resources. And the reason that she does that is for her, it really is out of sight, out of mind, so she has to be able to see the whole thing at once. And that's just the way she works. She's a very successful student. When she graduates, all she has to do is finish her big paper, her thesis. She'll be great at research and will make great contributions to the academic community and to autism as well. So again, the big three. What do we do for Farhan when he can't go to work because they've closed Penn Station and nobody's traveling anymore? What routines can he do in order to keep well, both mentally and physically? So what can he do to maintain contact with his colleagues from home? Is there some sort of work that he can do still providing this information? Maybe something related to developing maps, making sure that the maps are accurate, that can be done at home through the computer. What can we do to make sure that Farhan maintains his routines? If he's at work at 8 o'clock every morning, can he start work at home at 8 o'clock in the morning? When he takes a break at 10:30, say a coffee break, and he talks with his colleagues, can he have a Zoom call, just like we're having now, to interact with his colleagues, or by phone, for example? And let's make sure that he moves around. Yeah, it needs to be intentional in his movements. Communication. Well, certainly spoken word is pretty easy for this person, so that works pretty well. However, he still may be very literal in terms of communication. And then finally, what can he do to take care of himself? And we already mentioned some possible self-care possibilities, and whatever else he can do to take care of himself as well. So sometimes just breathing is all you need to do. Taking a few breaths, either getting to or thinking of yourself in a very peaceful place, going on Google Images and finding a place like this or whatever makes you feel calm and relaxed, and just observe and let thoughts run through your mind. Don't try to stop them, don't engage in them, just kind of let them pass by. And then after 5 minutes or so of doing this, you'll probably be much more relaxed. A couple more resources, some big organizations. Autism Speaks, for example. If you're looking for reliable information, whenever there's something that goes on in the world, a big event, in this case, this pandemic, we always need to be careful to make sure that whatever information we get is reliable. It's reliable and valid. So if you go to the Autism Speaks page, you'll see links to a number of resources, including a direct link to the Center for Disease Control for the latest information that they have in terms of information and what to do about the epidemic. And there's also the Autism Society. We can go there as well. They have a number of toolkits, and you can click on each one of these little squares and get more information on supporting yourself and supporting others in terms of COVID-19. So continuing to think about employment, because we all have to work for a living, whether we're autistic or otherwise. As we think about matching characteristics, working with the characteristics and appreciating characteristics, and matching those to job attributes and positions. For example, I know of a fellow in Florida who loves to do nothing more than to take clothes out of a dryer and fold them with perfect creases. And he does this really fast, so fast that his hands are a blur. Well, I know many people who would like help with their laundry. How many of you would like someone to help you fold your laundry? And I know so many people who would. And he'll do it for you. He'd be very happy to fold your laundry. However, you have to pay him to do it. That's his job. And he works in a laundromat. Well, I don't think he's working in a laundromat now. So what can we do to help him? Again, thinking of those big 3 C's, the routines, routines that he has, providing support in some way for those routines. Communication. He doesn't speak very much. He's got a few words here and there. So I would think visual schedules would probably be helpful to him. Maybe visual social stories, possibly something like we saw from the state of Qatar, or the first social story that we saw at the beginning of this webinar. And again, what can you do as his support person? Maybe you're his parent, maybe you're his support person in another way. What can you do to keep yourself calm and keep yourself in tip-top shape to support this person? And also other things that you can teach this person that will help him remain calm. So here I am as an adult, getting there anyways. I entered college. College was a utopia. I had more friends. If I wanted to ride my bicycle at midnight, I could find someone just as strange as I was to also ride at midnight. Courses were more interesting, no more bullies. Dating often occurs in college. And for me, I could never quite figure out what dating was all about. I remember my first encounter, after spending a lot of time with this lady, she suddenly told me that she likes hugs and back rubs. And I think that has a particular meaning. Well, what it meant for me is, gee, I've got this brand new friend, and she doubles as a deep pressure temple grandin squeeze machine, as I am a sensory seeker type of person. And as a sensory seeker, as a child, that would mean spinning around in circles, riding my bicycle, and spending all day on roller coasters if I could. And as an adult, that's one of the reasons that I travel around the world. And I've been to India many times and look forward to returning to India many more times, and many other countries, is because it involves riding in an airplane. This great proprioceptive and vestibular input when an airplane takes off, and especially when it goes through turbulence. So as planes go through turbulence and I look at the wings flapping up and down, a couple of things come to mind. One is airplanes must be autistic because their wings are flapping and they're enjoying the whole situation bouncing around up in the air. And then two, I'm not sure why other people are turning green and various other colors when this happens. Last year, I remember flying from New York to Dallas, a flight that's supposed to take about 2.5 hours. Well, we got there, and it's about 2 hours and 20 minutes. We're supposed to land, but there was so much turbulence and so much weather that that it took another 2 hours of circling the airport and trying to land, and all of these aborted landings of almost getting to the runway, and then the pilot just gunning the engine and doing it again. And so a lot of people, I guess the parasympathetic nervous systems didn't like that much at all. But for me, I was just having a good old time. And I just wanted to make sure that we landed in time for me to make my next flight. That was all I was concerned about. Anyways, sensory seeker. So after a lot of conversation with this lady, I found out she wanted to be my girlfriend. No, I wasn't interested. But it also made me realize that there was this whole other area of communication that we call nonverbal. So I spent hours reading books on body language, interaction, dating for dummies, for example, and building a lexicon of nonverbal communication. So many years later, now I'm in graduate school, spending a lot of time with this lady, and she first reviewing each other's homeworks, then doing things socially, and then one day at a beach very much like this, she suddenly gave me a kiss, a hug, and held my hand. Now I had the social story down. It went something like this: if a woman hugs you, kisses you, and holds your hand all at about the same time, it probably means she wants to be your girlfriend. And if that's the case, you better have an answer right away. And well, it seemed to be a good thing to do. And we've got just a few more months, and then we will have celebrated our 30th wedding anniversary. So if you want to find out what life is like on her side of the spectrum, she isn't on the autism spectrum. I guess she has her own spectrum. Then you can read her contributions to my book, my autobiography, Beyond the Wall. And now I spend most of my time in a sheltered workshop for people with Asperger's syndrome. And here, well, I guess I can't go there now with the COVID-19, so now it's done more by Zoom meetings like this and by phone. We perseverate on topics that nobody else wants to hear about for months and years at a time. And we talk whether people want to listen or not. Sometimes social interaction between community members could be improved. Some people refer to this place as a university. If you want to find undiagnosed people on the spectrum, just check out your professors. And as we think about moving forward during the time of this epidemic, I remember when it really hit, maybe 2 weeks ago, a little bit longer than 2 weeks ago, I was all set to take a flight down to Huntsville, Alabama, which is a rural place in Alabama where there's a small branch of a state university. I think it's Alabama University in Huntsville is what it is. I was supposed to give a workshop there. And then President Trump gave his speech, and things seemed to be deteriorating very quickly. And, and so it made me realize, especially after my wife called me a number of times telling me that I shouldn't go, not that I probably wouldn't get the virus, but I might unintentionally walk into some sort of quarantine situation and get stuck in Alabama or something like that. So I contacted the people at that university, suggested to them, I think we better do it through Zoom. And I then packed up my car and made a run for the border. And what I mean by that is that while I teach in New York at Adelphi University, I live in Boston. So I spend about half my time in each, half my time at the university in New York and half my time 208 miles north in Boston. Unless I'm off at a conference, and that's, you might say, the third half of my activities. And three halves make a whole. It's a kind of new math in this case, where so I made my way home, and while the university initially agreed to do it by Zoom, as I mentioned, I then got an email the following morning. Due to what the president has said, we now have our own activities that we need to address regarding our university. So let's do it at a later time. And what this has provided for me is it's always important to look at positive side of things. Certainly a lot of negatives that have to do with this virus. You can't deny that. But also good things can come of it, such as focusing on how we can better support individuals on the autism spectrum. Or for me anyways, having an unprecedented amount of time at home with my wife. So we've been here for 2 weeks. I think that only happens maybe once a year when we go on vacation somewhere. And we're just happy at home, cooking and being together. So it does provide some additional time doing that. And I see that as a positive. So as we look at promoting success, and in this case, it's success in getting autistic individuals through the COVID virus pandemic. I feel that if we have ways for autistic people to feel productive and fulfilled, then they're successful, whatever that may be. And success is an individualized thing. So what I consider as success for me is going to be different for somebody else. So I think of that person who is folding laundry deep in Florida, not talking to many people. I see that as a success because he wakes up in the morning and he's eager to go to work and he loves doing it and it gives him fulfillment and a sense of productivity. He is productive. He's contributing something valuable to society. That's a success for him. And success is something that's more of a journey as opposed to getting to some particular endpoint. Or you could say, I suppose there's a lot of little successes in being successful. Or maybe you call that reaching goals in our journey in life. And for the rest of us, what can we do to be successful as we get through this COVID-19 epidemic, as we achieve success in supporting autistic individuals through this challenging time? And I believe that if you've learned even just one thing in understanding how to help yourself be successful and how to help autistic individuals be successful during these challenging times, then you're exactly where you need to be right now. And it's great to be speaking in front of so many people who have come today who want to learn more about supporting autistic individuals to be successful throughout life in general, and in particular during these difficult times of the COVID-19 epidemic. So I want to thank you for all you're doing to support autistic individuals. We've got some time for questions. Certainly if more questions come, if we don't get to them or they occur to you later, you can certainly reach me here at www.drstephenshore.com. And these are some of my books, some of them translated into other languages. And certainly I'm ready for any questions that people may have.
Yes, Professor Shaw, we have quite a few questions. And thank you so much for your lecture. It was truly enlightening to have you today, World Autism Awareness Day, and give your lecture on Beyond the Wall, supporting people with autism and Asperger's. So the first, I'm trying to coalesce people's questions together. The first question that we have is about routine. Smita Sharma from Kolkata, Dr. Ghosh, and Ashrafi have a question about how Smita says that it's possible to explain children who are in their teens that they have to stay at home. But how do you explain to younger children that they have to stay at home, especially at a time that they're going out? Which is also similar to Dr. Ghosh's question, where he asks about, is there a special way to communicate the severity of COVID-19 to anyone on the spectrum without making them obsessively worried?
All right, well, a bunch of good questions, all centering on how do we best communicate to that autistic person and about what we need to do and the severity of things. And if we're, again, I go back to asking the question, how does that autistic person best communicate? How do they best understand? So for a young child, it may be something that's more picture related. And it might be something related to one of those social stories, those pictorially oriented social stories that I showed a little bit earlier today. And why do you not want to go outside? Why do you have to stay inside? And I think it's always better to talk about what you need to do. So as opposed to saying you can't go outside because, well, then what do? You talk about why you need to stay inside. And talking about how there is this virus, coronavirus, even getting a picture of one and including that in a social story or a visual schedule, and talking about how you need to remain inside so that you won't become sick and have to remain in bed. And maybe having a picture of a person being in bed. It could be used to represent that. I definitely wouldn't perseverate on numbers and death tolls and things like that, because that might get the autistic person obsessing unnecessarily, getting too focused on that. But then again, there are other individuals on the autism spectrum where such information would be helpful to them. So just like anybody else, just like with all of us, there are ways that we best communicate and best understand the concepts of what is going on, and that's how we need to communicate.
Thank you so much, Professor Shore. The next question is from Irfan from Bangalore and Zahir from Kashmir, which I will tie up with Jayati's question as well. They talk about their children getting very hyperactive, and Jayati mentions that her child is only interested in unproductive activities like a YouTube or eating chocolate. Like, how do you reverse that and make it productive at such a time?
All right, well, getting to YouTube, YouTube can be a huge waste of time, and I've heard figures that at least 80% of what's on YouTube is stuff that you really don't want to be dealing with, and it's useless stuff, but that leaves the other 20% or so. And the question is there a productive way in which to use YouTube? Is there, for example, when I'm working with autistic people and talking about nonverbal communication or hidden curriculum, part of what I do is I ask the people I'm working with, can't, for next week, I'd like you to find 2 examples of people breaking the social rule of personal space. And then 2 more where examples of where people are keeping, are understanding and using the rules of personal space. So you can use YouTube as a resource, but it has to be directed. So what I would do is I would tie that into the routines that this person usually engages with at school, using YouTube as, again, as a resource to look for related videos. Insofar as eating chocolate, while especially at this time, those of us who like chocolate would probably like to spend all day eating the stuff. We all know that that's not good. So certainly saving chocolate for particular times, and not necessarily as a reward, but just at particular times. It might be dessert after lunch. You might have some for a snack, but certainly not a whole pound of chocolate.
Right. There are many more questions, and I'd request all the participants to reach out to Professor Shore. Professor Shore, if you could just tell me your domain name, I will send it across to everyone right now so that they can reach out to you.
Oh, okay. All right. So you can send them. You can check my website, www.drstephenshore.com, and in that way, you'll be able to reach me, and I'll be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Do you have any closing notes for us on World Autism Awareness Day?
Yeah, I do. This is the 13th annual World Autism Awareness Day. Like with so many things, we're doing it differently this year. And I'm really thankful that we have technology, computers, and Zoom, so that we can maintain our contact. And I think we can use this World Autism Awareness Day to think about how we can take awareness to the next level, or the next levels. And as we move from awareness to acceptance, which means working with the autistic characteristics. It doesn't mean that we accept challenging behaviors. It doesn't mean that we accept meltdowns, but we accept that these situations may be as a result of perhaps sensory overload in this case. And we look at those interests and that so many of us autistic people have, and think of them as gifts, as doorways to learning how to interact with that autistic person and find ways to move that autistic person to leading a fulfilling and productive life. And then moving on to appreciation. What can we do to recognize what autistic people can contribute to society, such as that person in Florida who loves to fold laundry, such as what we're seeing some of the big software companies doing as they actively seek autistic geeks. Not all of us are geeks, but enough of us are, so they've noticed that we can do things in IT better than other people, faster and more easily, and they're recognizing that. And then putting it into action. Maybe this is a call for action to redouble our efforts to develop greater understanding and finding ways to support autistic individuals to lead fulfilling, productive lives, and to make that the rule rather than the exception. And then finally, understanding that all of these strategies that we have for autistic individuals also tend to be good for everybody else as well. And again, I thank you for coming here. Thank you for all that you're doing to support autistic individuals in their lives. So Sakri, I don't know if you're talking because I don't hear you.
Oh, sorry, I was muted. No, I
Oh,
just give a huge shout out to Dr. Bernstein, Mrs.
oh yeah.
Mary Barua, Mrs. Iona Kundu, and Dr. Bakka for being here today, and for the work that they continue doing. I don't think everyone switched on their video, but if you can, thank you.
That was a good screenshot.
Yes, I got it.
Yeah, it's great to see everybody here, seeing familiar faces and seeing new faces. And we're all one big autism community, supporting each other, both in our efforts to support autistic individuals and to support ourselves.
Yeah.
And finally, as a result, supporting the entire the entire community of the world.
Yeah. I have sent the link to a form, and that's a feedback form if everyone can take out their time. I know I'm getting a lot of questions. They're unable to fill out the feedback form. If you can try it again in 10 minutes, I'll just check whatever is technically wrong with it. And we'll have the Bengali translation of Professor Shore's lecture available, and we'll circulate it on Monday for everyone to have a look. Thank you so much for being here today, all of you. We had 100 participants, and now I'm so happy you could take out the time to talk. We have a lot of webinars scheduled in April, and if you can, I will link the Facebook pages to the chat box here. If you can just subscribe to our Facebook, our YouTube channels, you'll stay up to date. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you. Thank you, Professor Shore.
Oh, my pleasure and my honor. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.